$4.5 billion simply vanished from the public coffers of a rising Southeast Asian nation, diverted not by foreign invaders, but by the very architects entrusted with its future. This staggering hemorrhage of capital transformed a state-backed initiative into a personal piggy bank for the global elite, funding mega yachts, Hollywood blockbusters, and diamond necklaces. The sheer audacity of the theft shattered institutional trust and exposed a gaping rot at the heart of international finance. The mechanism for this unprecedented wealth extraction was 1MDB, short for One Malaysia Development Berhad, launched in 2009. Originally conceived as a sovereign wealth fund, it was designed to drive strategic investments and forge global partnerships that would propel Malaysia into a high-income economy. Instead of relying on surplus national reserves, the entity was heavily leveraged, issuing billions in government-guaranteed bonds to raise capital. This foundational structure created a massive pool of liquid assets ripe for exploitation. At the helm of this initiative was Prime Minister Najib Razak, who held absolute control over the fund's advisory board, granting him unchecked authority over its sprawling operations. Operating in the shadows was Joe Low, a young, charismatic financier with no official title, but an extraordinary ability to manipulate sovereign wealth. Low leveraged his deep connections with Middle Eastern royalty and global bankers to engineer complex financial architectures that served his own insatiable appetite for power and luxury. The structural flaws of the fund were immediately apparent to forensic accountants, yet deliberately ignored by those in charge of safeguarding the nation's wealth. Basic due diligence, the comprehensive appraisal of a business undertaken before a commercial transaction, was routinely bypassed or entirely fabricated. Corporate governance was virtually non-existent, allowing a tight-knit circle of insiders to authorize massive capital transfers without the standard regulatory friction that protects public assets from gross misappropriation. The first major siphon occurred under the guise of a $1.0 billion joint venture with a little-known energy company called Petro-Saudi International. Marketed as a strategic partnership to secure energy reserves, the deal was a meticulously crafted illusion designed to separate the sovereign wealth fund from its capital. When the funds were wired, $700 million were abruptly diverted from the joint venture's accounts into a completely unrelated offshore entity. That offshore entity was Good Star Limited, a shell company secretly controlled by Joe Low, tucked away in the opaque financial jurisdiction of the Seychelles. To mask the diversion, the conspirators utilized creative accounting, a deceptive practice where financial records are manipulated to exploit loopholes and hide illicit flows. False documentation was presented to compliance officers, framing the massive transfer as a legitimate loan repayment, effectively burying the theft beneath layers of corporate obfuscation. While offshore accounts swelled with illicit gains, the domestic reality in Malaysia remained starkly disconnected from the fund's grand promises of modernization. The highly publicized green energy projects and real estate developments were largely superficial, serving as mere props to justify the continuous issuance of high-yield debt. The resulting economic distortion left the nation saddled with mounting liabilities while the stolen capital circulated through the arteries of the global shadow economy. To sustain the illusion and generate even more capital, the conspirators turned to Wall Street, specifically enlisting the formidable machinery of Goldman Sachs. The investment bank was tasked with underwriting 3 massive bond offerings, a process involving securitization, where various financial assets are pooled and repackaged into interest-bearing securities for investors. These bond sales raised a staggering $6.5 billion, ostensibly to fund power plants and strategic real estate acquisitions. The allure of astronomical profits blinded the gatekeepers of global finance to the glaring anomalies within these transactions. Goldman Sachs collected roughly $600 million in fees for underwriting the bonds, a figure exponentially higher than the industry standard for such sovereign debt issuances. This exorbitant compensation structure incentivized bankers to look the other way, deliberately ignoring glaring red flags regarding the ultimate destination of the newly raised billions. The diverted funds fueled a lifestyle of unprecedented excess, transforming Joe Low into a legendary figure among the global ultra-rich. Stolen Malaysian wealth purchased a $250 million super yacht, financed the production of the blockbuster film The Wolf of Wall Street, and acquired prime real estate in Manhattan and Beverly Hills. This grotesque display of consumption was not merely a byproduct of the fraud, but its primary objective, reflecting a profound psychological detachment from the impoverished citizens footing the bill. The true cost of these Hollywood parties and luxury acquisitions was quietly transferred to the Malaysian populace, who would ultimately bear the burden of the sovereign wealth fund's catastrophic insolvency. Every dollar squandered on crystal champagne or rare artwork represented a direct theft from public infrastructure, healthcare, and education budgets. The nation would lose billions, mortgaging its future to finance the hedonistic fantasies of a corrupt political elite and their rogue financial architects. The facade began to crack when journalists investigating the labyrinthine flow of funds across international borders started publishing their findings. Independent media outlets like the Sarawak Report and global financial newspapers began leaking emails and banking records that exposed the massive discrepancies in the fund's balance sheets. These early revelations provided the crucial forensic evidence needed to unravel the complex web of shell companies and offshore trusts. In response to the mounting scrutiny, the political establishment orchestrated a ruthless campaign of suppression to conceal the bleeding of the national treasury. Najib Razak purged dissenting voices from his cabinet, replaced the Attorney General who was preparing corruption charges, and aggressively targeted media organizations reporting on the scandal. This authoritarian crackdown demonstrated the dangerous intersection of financial fraud and absolute political power, where state institutions are weaponized to protect the guilty. The scandal transcended domestic corruption, exposing the deep complicity of the international banking system in facilitating the movement of illicit capital. Major financial institutions across Switzerland, Singapore, and the United States failed to enforce basic anti-money laundering protocols, allowing billions of dollars in stolen sovereign wealth to wash through their pristine accounts. The vast network of offshore havens provided the essential infrastructure for the fraud, proving that grand corruption requires global cooperation. The sheer scale of the money laundering eventually triggered the intervention of international law enforcement, most notably the United States Department of Justice. Federal investigators launched a massive kleptocracy asset recovery initiative, filing civil forfeiture complaints that detailed the breathtaking scope of the international conspiracy. Court documents revealed a highly sophisticated operation that utilized fraudulent investment funds and fake corporate entities to systematically drain the Malaysian treasury over several years. One of the most audacious deceptions involved the creation of a fraudulent company designed to mimic a legitimate Abu Dhabi state-owned entity called Albar Investments PJS. The conspirators set up a shell corporation with an almost identical name in the British Virgin Islands, subtly adding the word limited to the end. This slight linguistic manipulation tricked compliance departments into authorizing the transfer of $3.5 billion into the fake account, believing they were dealing with a sovereign partner. The success of the fake ABAR entity highlighted a catastrophic failure of institutional safeguards within some of the world's most prestigious banks. Financial gatekeepers failed to verify the true ownership of the offshore accounts, relying on superficial documentation and the perceived authority of the political figures involved. This systemic negligence allowed a handful of rogue actors to bypass the sophisticated security apparatus of the global financial system with astonishing ease. The most damning forensic discovery occurred when investigators traced the flow of funds directly into the personal banking network of the Malaysian Prime Minister. Financial records showed that exactly $681 million had been deposited into Najib Razak's private accounts just before a fiercely contested national election. This undeniable paper trail shattered the illusion of his innocence and provided concrete proof that the sovereign wealth fund was being used as a political slush fund. Desperate to explain the massive influx of cash, the Prime Minister's defenders concocted a highly improbable narrative to justify the deposits. They publicly claimed the $681 million was a personal, no-strings-attached donation from an anonymous member of the Saudi royal family. This fabricated alibi was quickly dismantled by forensic accountants, who traced the origins of the money directly back to the bond sales underwritten by Goldman Sachs. The revelation of this brazen theft ignited a fierce democratic awakening among the Malaysian public, who had long tolerated whispers of corruption, but could not ignore the sheer magnitude of this betrayal. In a historic electoral upset in 2018, voters ousted the ruling coalition that had held power for 6 decades, directly punishing the architects of the 1MDB scandal. This political earthquake demonstrated that even deeply entrenched regimes can be toppled when the financial exploitation of the populace becomes undeniable. The change in government stripped Najib Razak of his political immunity, leading to a swift and unprecedented legal reckoning. The former prime minister faced dozens of charges, including abuse of power, criminal breach of trust, and money laundering. Following a highly publicized trial, he was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison, marking a watershed moment for accountability in a region historically plagued by elite impunity. The fallout extended far beyond the borders of Southeast Asia, forcing a massive reckoning on Wall Street. Goldman Sachs, facing intense pressure from international regulators, ultimately agreed to pay over $5.0 billion in penalties and restitution to the Malaysian government. This historic settlement wiped out the exorbitant profits the bank had generated from the bond sales, serving as a stark warning about the severe legal and reputational risks of facilitating sovereign corruption. While the political and corporate enablers faced justice, the mastermind behind the financial architecture managed to slip through the dragnet. Joe Low vanished into the geopolitical shadows, becoming one of the most wanted white-collar fugitives in the world, allegedly sheltered by foreign governments, impervious to extradition requests. His continued evasion of law enforcement remains a frustrating, unresolved chapter in the pursuit of total accountability for the plundered billions. The enduring legacy of this massive fraud is a chilling indictment of the global financial architecture that made it possible. The scandal proved that sophisticated compliance algorithms and stringent regulatory frameworks are entirely useless when human gatekeepers are compromised by the promise of astronomical fees. The seamless movement of stolen billions across multiple jurisdictions revealed that the international banking system is inherently vulnerable to exploitation by well-connected kleptocrats. Today, the Malaysian people continue to navigate the economic wreckage left in the wake of the sovereign wealth fund's collapse. The government is forced to allocate significant portions of its annual budget merely to service the interest on the fraudulent debt, diverting crucial resources away from national development. This generational financial burden serves as a daily reminder of the devastating long-term consequences that occur when public trust is sacrificed on the altar of private greed. The draining of a nation's wealth through 1MDB stands as a monumental warning about the fragility of institutional integrity in the face of unchecked ambition. It unmasked the dark symbiosis between corrupt political leadership and the amoral mechanisms of global finance, where billions can vanish with a few keystrokes. Ultimately, the scandal demands a relentless vigilance against the quiet, sophisticated theft that threatens the economic stability of nations worldwide.